This and every episode of the Brewlosophy podcast is brought to you by the American Homebrewers Association, a member-driven organization that wants to help you save money on beer and brewing supplies. In addition to providing brewing resources and hosting one-of-a-kind events, the AHA offers money-saving discounts at nearly 2,000 beery destinations around the country through their Member Deals program. Join the AHA at homebrewersassociation.org and make your beer money go further.
Hey everybody, this is the Brewlosophy podcast. I'm your host, Marshall Schott, and you are listening to the very first episode in what we're thinking will become a fun sort of style-focused series that's paired with discussion of our attempts to make said style that we're focusing on in the show with using shorter and shoddier methods. As with all new things, there's bound to be some hiccups, so please feel free to share your feedback with us. Now, the style that we're focusing on for this show is one that steps slightly outside of stylistic boundaries, creating a sort of Americanized version of like a classic German lager. Hoppier versions of Pilsner seem to be popping up all over the place lately, which is exciting for a lager lover like me. Fortunately, I live fairly close to Firestone Walker Brewing Company, who makes what is, in my opinion, the premier example of this style, Pivo Pils, which I know I'm not the only one who feels it's one of the best versions of this style.
Oh, I love it. I think it was one of the first ones that I came into contact with, and I know there were some other ones that reportedly came out first, but it's certainly the ones that I associate with the style just because of, one, Firestone Walker is awesome. But
yeah, they are.
I believe there was, I want to say, I think it was Ballast Point had Fathom or something like that. You know, it was like an IPL they released and it won some awards like in 2010 or something, like way back. And there was a couple other guys who released basically an IPL. I think they were being called, a year or two later.
Yeah, I remember the whole India Pale Lager thing. I think some people are still kind of doing that. Correct me if I'm wrong, at least in the way that we're thinking about this. When we talk about Hoppy Pilsner or Hoppy Lagers, what we're referring to is basically something like a German-style Pilsner that is ultimately dry hopped or has a larger late hop addition, something like that. It's not like in the BJCP guidelines at this point, at least, but it's like a hoppier style of a kind of more of a traditional Pilsner.
Right, and that can go either way. I've seen people more or less lager an IPA, so it's just like an IPA grist.
Right.
And the only difference is the yeast and the lagering. And I've also seen people do basically a lager with a bolder late hop and often the American or New Zealand, Australian tropical hops.
Yeah. Well, and for those who follow along with what's going on in the BJCP, I believe, I'm not sure what the term they're using is, but they're thinking about adding a New Zealand style Pilsner or something like that as a kind of like a sub style of, or maybe its own style.
Yeah. So I think they're calling it a New Zealand Pilsner. Right. So it's just a pale, a highly attenuated, gold colored Pilsner that is more or less clean, so it doesn't have a lot of fermentation character, but then it showcases the hops with the characteristics we associate with New Zealand. The very citrusy, tropical.
Right.
hops.
Yeah. When I was down in New Zealand with Gordon Strong, who is very integral in the BJCP. That was a lot of the conversation that we had. We drank a lot of this kind of New Zealand style Pilsner. In this episode, we're going to be going over traditional methods used to make hoppier Pilsners, as well as discussing Malcolm's attempt to significantly abbreviate the brewing process, which will probably make some of our listeners cringe a bit. But hey, we'll let the results speak for themselves. I want to let everybody know about some upcoming events that we've got going on with HomebrewCon 2018 in the books. Our focus is now on Hop Harvest, which I couldn't be more excited for. If you're going to be around Yakima the last weekend of September, let us know. We'd love to meet up at Varietal Brewing or Bale Breaker for a beer or three. Contributor Brian Hall and I are going to be bouncing around the town with our friends from Yakima Valley Hops, and it sounds like the good folks from Imperial Yeast may be bouncing up there as well. We'll also be attending the Fresh Hop Ale Festival on September 29th, which I've heard is pretty incredible. I'm certainly excited for that event. If you have any interest in learning more about experimentation with brewing and beer, make sure to get your tickets for the Brew Your Own Boot Camp as soon as possible. Experimental Brewing's Denny Kahn and I are going to be hosting a 2-day seminar. It's actually the same seminar, one on each day. So there's 35 spots in both classes. Apparently they go really fast. So there's only 70 total spots and you get to pick the day you're going. I guess that's how it works. The boot camp's going to be held in Asheville, North Carolina on March 22nd and 23rd. We had a meeting with BYO's Brad Ring at HomebrewCon, and I'm telling you, this is going to be a really fun, very educational event. There's a ton of great, lecturers who are going to be attending this thing. It's going to be good time. So, hey, listen, we're always looking for beer drinkers to participate in our experiments. If you live anywhere near any of us, we'd love to get you involved. We've got contributors in Anchorage, Alaska, Chicago, Illinois, Denver, Colorado, Pueblo, Colorado, Corona, California, Atlanta, Georgia, and I'm right here in Fresno, California. Just shoot me an email, marshall@brewlosophy.com, and I'll connect you with the contributor who lives closest to you. Major cheers to everyone who's been using our links when shopping online. It is super helpful. If you're looking for an easy way to help us to continue doing what it is we do, those links can be found at brewlosophy.com/support. We also offer rewards for your support. By becoming a patron of Brewlosophy, you'll receive things like unique discounts at YakimaValleyHops.com, a chance to win a $50 Love to Brew gift certificate every month we draw somebody, and an invitation to a monthly live Q&A with a special guest, among many other things. Our next guest for the live Q&A is none other than Brewlosophy's BJCP National Judge and all-around good guy, Malcolm Frazer. How you feeling about this, Malcolm?
Yeah, it should be a good time. I look forward to interacting with everyone. I love being, more or less put on the spot, meaning like you can't really prepare for that. So I like answering off the cuff, and usually one or two supporters comes up with some great questions, and it almost takes over the conversation, which I think is great. So I look forward to it.
No, I agree. We've had some great guests in the past, and Malcolm, I know you've been present at most of the past live Q&As. I think they've been super interesting, very educational. The list of upcoming guests includes people like Russian River's Vinny Chilurzo, Seth Klon from Mecca Great Estate Malt, and Dr. Charlie Bamforth from the UC Davis Brewing Program. All of that just for helping us out a little bit. Learn more about becoming a patron over at patreon.com/brewlosophy. All right, time for some feedback, which this week is brought to you by our friends from Imperial Yeast, who are providing brewers with the finest quality yeast on the market. Packing 200 billion cells into each pitch-right pouch, brewers are ensured a quick and healthy fermentation. With a wide range of ale and lager strains, as well as some funkier stuff, Imperial Yeast is sure to have what you need to turn your wort into delicious beer. Go check out everything Imperial Yeast has to offer at imperialyeast.com today. Okay, listener Jason Spellman from New Albany, New York, wrote in with a few things. He says, first off, thanks for the continued stellar content. I have friends, but none that brew, so between Reddit and Brewlosophy, I feel like I get my beer talk fix since I have no time for a club. My wife couldn't care less about the how as long as she stays flush with IPAs. I've gotten so far as to perform a short and shoddy subjective experiment on her, and it turns out she likes dry hops, not IPAs. He goes on to list a couple of points here, and I guess we'll just address them one by one. The first one, he says, the podcast is most appreciated, especially since I spend a lot of time in the car carting kids around when I'm not working my unconventional schedule. I think we can relate with that, Malcolm, a little bit.
I just had my daughter interrupt about 5 minutes ago.
Yeah. And then he says, regarding Jersey and Tim, at first exposure, my thought was, what the shit is this? Then I realized I've got a bunch of buddies that drink naught but Miller, Bud, and Coors, and they have the same reactions to some of my beers. I'm happy to see Jersey and Tim's palate's progression over time. Gives me hope for my friends. Well, that's cool that we're giving people hope, I guess. The third point, he says, I saw the life-changing merch coming soon in the store. I bought a shirt several months back. Any thoughts to adding hats or brewery-style work shirts? I'm told I have too many t-shirts. That's a really good question. We've been kind of in this weird state of working with Yakima Valley Hops on merch stuff, and then we had HomebrewCon come up, and all of our energy went to focusing on that. So I've been talking with Jeff Perkins at Yakima Valley Hops, and it sounds like we've got some cool ideas in store for getting more merch out there. So just stay tuned. It might not be immediate, but you should start to see more stuff in the YakimaValleyHops.com store for Brewlosophy. So I'm not sure if it'll be work shirts, but if enough people want them, let us know, and I'm sure we can work that out. So
I want to lobby for tank tops. I have so many t-shirts at this point. My wife has put like an order where if I have to bring one into the house, I have to remove two from the house. So
plus, sun's out, guns out, man.
Yeah, that's
you know
right.
what I mean? So now tank tops would be fun. So, but we should, like I said, we should be getting more merch in the store soon as the dust settles from HomebrewCon. things might be changing there. So finally, he says, I think some of this is rubbing off on my kids. I've gone so far as to let my kids just scoop random grains into the bucket at the homebrew store. We've made some weird but decent small batch beers. Cherrywood Smoked Double comes to mind. Last week after our adventure, my 4-year-old started crying in the car. I asked him what was wrong. He said, Dad, you forgot the yeast. No, I'm not making this up. I reassured him we had plenty at home. Thanks for all the hard work you guys do. Well, that's a cute story.
Yeah, I have a similar story of my daughters more or less telling on me as far as my activities at home. So my daughter Molly this is like 2 years ago, so she's only 4. She was at school, and supposedly they were making pirate hooks. They're using like those styrofoam cups as like the cup where your hand goes in, right. And pipe cleaners, which is like the ubiquitous, they use that for everything in crafts. So they had pipe cleaners to make the hook, and then they were supposed to take tin foil and put it over the hook to make it shiny and metal-like, and then they could paint the hook however they wanted, right, out of the cup. They could paint the cup however they wanted. However, after receiving the directions, Molly had put the paint in the cup and then put foil over top of it, at which point the teacher says, and what are you doing? And she said to the teacher, I'm making a yeast starter to make beer, because she had seen me and helped me put tin foil over, flasks and Erlenmeyers and such. Oh. So I learned about this during a parent-teacher night.
That's awesome. You teach them while they're young, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Well, thank you for the feedback. If you have any show feedback, you can send it to feedback@brewlosophy.com or leave us a voice message by calling 951-444-0320. All right. As a beer-flavored beer fan, I very rarely drink, and I never brew styles that are adulterated with adjuncts. So it's always a curious experience for me to sample beers other people made using such ingredients. Looking for quality feedback, homebrewer Richard Spohr sent me a bottle of a beer he calls Dave's Spicy Jam, which he describes as a smoked strong ale brewed with jalapeno and aged on raspberries.
1 minute beer review with Jersey and Tim.
Look at that. Look. Out of our wheelhouse. It's dark, but not stout dark, not coffee dark, not...
I'm just smelling it.
Do what you want. I don't like it.
Oh, what is that, pepper?
Let me tell you this, Timmy.
I'm listening.
I grew up in South America, and we had motorboats, and we'd go out on the river, and you would have to siphon gas out of the tank into the Evinrude engine.
This is it.
This is what I would taste when I'd be like, when you siphon too long in the gas of your mouth.
This is what I've siphoned out too. It smells like pepper even.
All right, well, I get the pepper. I'll give it a 10 on pepper content. I'm going to give it a 0 on, we've been begging for a beer we would hate.
This might be the one.
Is this the one?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, whoever you are. I don't like this at all.
No.
It's gasoline and pepper.
I think my truck might run on this.
The DeLorean could go to the future on this.
Yeah.
0 Jersey Tims for me.
Yeah, I'm with you there.
Okay, so average of 0? 0. I hate it, whatever it is.
I'm not sure I was perceiving gasoline or any other petroleum product, but the blend of smoke, pepper, and raspberries did create a very unique, almost indescribable flavor for me. Again, it wasn't gas-like, but it certainly wasn't pleasant to my palate. That being said, I don't really like smoked beers. I never have, and this one didn't change my mind. And I'm also not a big fan of peppered beers. So I take two things I don't like, you put them together. It's not like I'm going to like it anymore. I don't think so. Malcolm, you've ever had anything like this?
No. Jersey and Tim's, well, Jersey in particular's description doesn't make me chomping. It doesn't have me chomping at the bit to try it. I like how he immediately went to siphoning gas, though. So yeah. It's like
in South America, yeah.
It just like warped him back there in his crazy mind. It's just like, yeah. So
I know.
Lovely.
Well, for me, this beer, what I wrote down in my notes was that it tasted like an icy that had been melted over a very smoky fire with jalapenos accidentally dropped into it. It had kind of the components of a beer that I expect, but then it had all of these flavors on top of it that just completely washed out any of the pleasant parts of the beer. And you know what, Richard, I'm sure if you like it, then that's what matters the most. I'm like a vanilla beer drinker. I just like my normal, beer flavored beers, and it's tough to get me to really appreciate anything outside of that. So I'll own that. But I do appreciate you sending it in. If anybody else wants to send in a beer for review, if you're brave enough, then you can email me, Marshall@brewlosophy.com, and we will get you all set up. All right, Hoppy Pilsner is the name of the game when we return.
Hi, I'm Stephen Leach, creator of Brow Supply Brewing Systems, here to tell you about our latest Unibrow brewing system. Modeled after the brew in a bag method, the Unibrow uses the same kettle for both mashing and boiling, replacing the fabric bag with a stainless basket that can hold up to 20 pounds of grain. A heating element is run by an electric controller that allows for the maintenance of specific mash temperatures and makes mashing easier than ever. Each Unibrow is shipped with a counterflow chiller and the parts required to brew a batch of beer. We're really proud of the Unibrow, and we know you'll love it as much as we do. Go check it out at browsupply.com and sign up for our email list to receive special deals in your inbox.
When dumping wort-soaked grain and leftover low-gravity wort while cleaning up after a brew day, do you ever wonder what your true efficiency would be if that wort made its way to the kettle instead? Using the brew bag, a fabric filter for all mash tuns and brewing methods, allows you to capture every last drop of wort. Not only does this increase kettle efficiency, it lowers your grain bill, which saves you money. Throwing wort in the trash is like dumping a 12-pack down the drain and just doesn't make sense. Use the brew bag and leave no wort behind. I've been using these filters for a long time and recommend them to everyone. I never have to worry about a stuck sparge, and cleanup is fast and easy. Go grab yourself a brew bag fabric filter at brewinabag.com and be sure to use code TBP17 at checkout to get a discount on your order. Family-owned Atlantic Brew Supply is the largest homebrew shop in the Southeast. No gimmicks, no multinational corporate overlords, and no BS. They offer exclusive malts, yeast, and more from local artisans, as well as award-winning recipe kits. They also sell professional brewing gear and cask equipment from sister companies ABS Commercial and Cask Supply. Most ingredients are available by the ounce, plus Atlantic Brew Supply has an on-site calculator to help you craft your best brew. Orders are processed same day, and 2-day shipping is guaranteed for East Coast customers. Get 15% off your first order using promo code BREWPOD. That's BRUPOD at AtlanticBrewSupply.com. As every brewer knows, the best beer requires the best hops, which Yakima Valley Hops provides fresh from the source to brewers around the world, carrying everything from classics like Cascade to modern favorites like Galaxy and Mosaic, as well as other ingredients and gear. Yakima Valley Hops has it all. And don't forget to check out their new podcast, The Late Edition, where the YVH crew goes into depth on our favorite plant with industry experts. Head over to YakimaValleyHops.com now to see all they have to offer and subscribe to The Late Edition wherever it is you listen to podcasts. After a long brew day, the last thing I want to do is waste more time chilling wort. I've tried so many different options, and ultimately I settled on the super efficient immersion chillers made by Jaded Brewing. With the King Cobra and Hydra, I'm able to chill my entire batch of wort, from boiling to just a few degrees above groundwater temperature, in as little as 6 minutes. If an immersion chiller is right for your brewery, then do yourself a favor and check out all of the rad options Jaded Brewing has to offer at jadedbrewing.com, and be sure to let them know Brewlosophy sent you. So it only seems like it's been maybe 4 or 5 years since these hoppier pilsners have been around, and not much longer than the popularity of what I'm referring to as like craft lagers. For a long time, at least in the craft beer world, it was all about hops and IPAs and all of this, and then all of a sudden we started to see this kind of move back toward pilsners and appreciating really well-made, tasty lager beers. And it wasn't long after that kind of became popular that we started to see these more hoppier versions of more traditional style pilsners.
Yeah, so I think it was, as mentioned in the previous segment, the 2010, 2011 with Ballast Point had their Fathom, and I think they entered it. I can't remember if it was GABF or international competition, but they won, and I don't think it was until a year or two later they actually released it for bottles or even in keg. I don't remember the exact timeline. I just remember hearing about it, and then a bunch of other people started popping up with essentially what was one of two things: either a Hoppy Pilsner or an IPA that was fermented with lager yeast and then lagered itself. So there was two segments of this hoppy lager going on, two different forks in the road, if you will. You could either travel down one path or the other. And there was like one beer called Hopponius, I think it was by Jack's Abbey, and that was very malty, very intensely malty, but it was also intensely hoppy, yet lagered. So that was one way. And then, of course, we often talk about Pivo Pils, which was very lager-like in character, but it had that, at the time was an odd hop Saphir, this spicy, characterful hop that Pivo showcases. So I like the fact that there's two versions of it. To me, when I think of, if you're going to call it an IPL, if it's going to be a hoppy lager, I want it to be lager with hops.
Right.
That's what I look for. So...
Yeah, and to me, kind of the defining difference between what I'm calling like a hoppy pilsner, a hoppy lager, and an IPL, whatever that's become, is probably ABV. And most of the IPLs or the India Pale lagers that I've had, that I have experience with, have been, in the 6%, 6 to 7% alcohol range. They've been hopped almost like an IPA, but typically with like noble hops, something you might find in a typical lager or pilsner. Whereas these hoppier pilsners that we're referring to, again, kind of more like a German style pilsner, or I believe like Pivo Pils, if I'm not mistaken, is a Czech style pilsner that's just dry hopped with.
Well, it's a Czech style Czech inspired pilsner, anyways.
Yeah,
and then it's hopped late with Saphir.
Yeah. It's a unique hop to say the least, though, and to me, a genius find by Brynildson and the crew over at Firestone Walker. So the history of hoppier pilsners is fairly young. These aren't beers that have been around for a long time, at least the hoppier versions of them, but they are inspired by classic, traditional, German style and Czech style pilsners.
Right, and. Like I said, they go all over the place, so it just really depends. And the ones that I like tend to be, 4.5 to 5.5. 10, I like lower, so I would rather it be like 4.2. But
yeah, me too.
Like 4.5 to 5, and they are very much a lager underneath, and then they're just perhaps more Americanized, an egregious amount of late hopping, or a flick of dry hopping. And I don't even like them dry hopped so much. I just like them more aggressively late hopped.
Yeah,
and it's one of the cool things is each brewery can take its own take on it, which is awesome. It can be maltier, but I like them to be a bolder hopped lager of low alcohol.
I think that's a perfect way to define hoppy pilsners, that it's just a more boldly hopped lager beer. And typically, in terms of appearance, typically we're going to find, pale straw. You're going to get that kind of yellowish, crystal clear is ideal. Though, I've seen some with just maybe a little bit of chill haze or hop haze or something like that. But I think as far as hoppy pilsners or hoppy lagers go, we're looking more in that yellowish, clear range.
Yeah, once again, that's what I look for. But, if someone were to come out with a hoppy Vienna, I would try it, twice. But and I'm sure it's in the works, and I'm sure it's already been done. Actually, I'm sure someone's done like a hoppy dunkel, which was probably disgusting. But
yeah, that doesn't sound very good.
But whatever. I like there is no real defined IPL or hoppy lager, but to me, if there's a standard beer, it's probably Pivo.
Yeah, no, I agree. And that's a crystal clear, nice, super light yellow, just gorgeous, well-carbonated beer.
Oh yeah. It's we've talked about it before on other shows, and I love it. It's something that I have tried to emulate in my own brewing. So
definitely. Well, aromatically speaking, obviously it's a hoppier beer. So whatever hops one is using in their hoppy lager ought to be, you got to be able to perceive that in the aroma. It's going to be a late hopped beer, so you're going to have nice floral. Typically, I think for hoppier lagers, people are sticking with the more floral, spicy, noble-esque type hops. So, I love Tettnanger. I think Tettnanger makes a great late hop in these styles. But you can use pretty much any hop you want.
Yeah, I would say some people are doing, as I described earlier, a bolder, more pronounced late hopping in an otherwise more traditional Pilsner, but there are certainly people who are instead switching it up, and they'll even bitter and maybe mid boil hop with nobles, and then at the end they'll either late hop with American and or dry hop with American.
I think for me the issue with and we're referring to this as a style, and I guess it is a style, but it is not like an official BJCP style, so it's tough to discuss it. just because you used a lager yeast or you're using Pilsner malt instead of pale malt, if your beer tastes like a pale ale, and I think, for me, then it's a pale ale. So we got to figure out a way, if we're going to have a hoppy Pilsner, to make sure that it maintains those characteristics, those Pilsnery, lagery characteristics, and doesn't just come across as, another Americanized or American hopped pale ale. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So, I've mentioned this little mini rant that I'm going to go on here before. And the reason why it's not a BJCP style is because the BJCP doesn't dictate styles. The BJCP catalogs and categorizes what's being done. So because the industry hasn't more or less decided on what it is, the BJCP hasn't captured it and made it available for competition. So for example, the New Zealand Pilsner, well, that's a thing. It's a thing over in New Zealand. And yeah, it's not a thing more or less here in the US, but in an effort to be inclusive and to pay homage to the beer scene and the hop scene in New Zealand, the BJCP as a whole decided, we should recognize this because this is one of their beer styles that is unique to them and it's delicious. So why not make it available for competition?
And I think one of the things about New Zealand Pilsner, having experienced a lot of them and drank a bunch when I was over there, is they do maintain those characteristics. They, in terms of flavor, these are the types of beers that are supposed to have that nice, I get more of like a white bread crust, kind of weedy bread, doughy type of malt character from these, that is still there. It's still present despite having this bold hop character. And those New Zealand ones, that bold hop character is very fruity, doesn't come across as estery. And I think that's a thing that some people can get mixed up on as well when you're making these styles is, well, you want to avoid esters and have this really clean presentation. Then you're throwing all these hops in, which can get kind of confused with that.
Well, and it also becomes a case of where does one thing start and the other thing stop, Right. So if you have a hop that is fruity, but fruity in such a way that it could be described as esters, because sometimes you don't know, right? So you could have a hop that gives off maybe berries and pears, and you're like, oh, is that an English yeast you used? It's like, no, it's a lager yeast, but I used this hop that makes you think it's, so there's no right answer there. It's just kind of what I see is, these lines. So when does an IPL move into session IPA, and when does session IPA move into golden ale? British golden ale. Yeah. It's like, oh, you have a little more malt, so maybe you're a golden ale. Or you have a little more malt and it's English, so it's definitely a golden ale. Yeah. The English malt. Oh, this is lager character. So what do you mean by lager character? Is it sulfury? Is it clean? Because you could get super clean session IPA just by using Chico, our San Diego super yeast, So,
absolutely.
So I just don't know. What if I make a beer with Pilsner malt, and then I use an ale yeast that's very clean, and then I age it well, and I use mostly German noble hops. What is it? I don't know.
Yeah, we'll just call it the Malcolm. I guess
it is what you perceive it to be. It is what it presents itself to be. So, I think this is getting a little philosophical, but if it's mostly a lager with some late character, be it noble and or classic American or New Zealand, as long as it doesn't go so far into the lines that you're starting to think session IPA, then I would say that's a hoppy lager.
Yeah, sure. And I know though there are people out there who are all about, well, what is your intent? Call it what you intended.
That's bullshit.
I'm kind of on the other end where if I intended to make, a hoppy Pilsner, but it ends up tasting like a session IPA, I'll just call it a session IPA. Who cares? But just to kind of finish up on the description. So you mentioned kind of these hoppier Pilsners can have, or pretty much any style of lager, it's completely appropriate to have maybe a little bit of sulfur in the aroma from the lager yeast, which is known to produce kind of a sulfur characteristic. DMS is something you want to avoid, but is I guess on some level, I always have qualms talking about DMS because I'm just not convinced people can perceive it as well as they think they can. I think they mix it up with malt character, with like low kilned malt character all the time. But DMS on very, very low levels, I guess, is appropriate in styles like this. So if you get a little bit of that kind of corny, I guess, flavor, it's not necessarily a bad thing as long as it's not offensive.
Yeah, you know, I'm with you on the DMS thing. I think some people, if they have like a sweet, corny grain, they think it's DMS, you know, and I think sometimes it's just plain DMS, you know. So I don't know. If you have that sweet corn grain character and it's pleasing, then it's okay. If it's not pleasing, then it's a fault. You know?
Yeah, exactly.
There you go.
Yeah, and somebody might like it and you might not. So, you know, just
there you go.
Whatever. It is what it is. So, but those are kind of what you expect to smell and taste in a hoppier Pilsner. In terms of mouthfeel, it's exactly, I think, what people expect from a good, well attenuated lager. You know, crisp, light on the palate, fairly, not highly carbonated, but you know, an assertive a carbonation, nice fizz to it, and then kind of washes clean from the palate. Those are kind of the descriptors that I like to use, that I prefer in my hoppier Pilsner.
Yeah, and I think it should be eminently drinkable. I think you should want to drink them in quantity. So, you know, it should be one of those beers where you're drinking and you go, oh my God, I've drank half of this. You know,
yeah.
That's a sign of a well-crafted, well-balanced beer because you're drinking it and it's refreshing and you're taking large sips. You know, you're not laboring to drink it. You know, some of the very, very bold IPAs, while delicious, they can be a bit taxing on the palate. And
definitely
also if they're high alcohol, they can be taxing on your liver, you know, so
on your lifestyle,
exactly,
pretty much,
you know, so, you know, like a, you know, 4.5 to 5.5% ABV hoppy lager, you know, you can drink, you know, one or two, two certainly responsibly, you know, and you should almost catch yourself drinking it so fast because it's refreshing and thirst quenching and dry, and it leaves the palate, you know, kind of washes away without lingering and sticking around, you know.
I'm getting thirsty just talking about these two. I want a Pivo right now. Well, we talked a little bit about the ingredients that you would use to make a style like this, kind of the traditional methods for brewing a hoppy Pilsner. We're looking at, I think typically, you know, you're looking at like a continental, you know, lager malt, Pilsner malt, something like that. And you know, something like a Weirmann Pilsner malt to kind of contribute or, you know, impart those kind of bready characteristics and, but otherwise kind of stay out of the way. You know, and noble hops are pretty common in Pilsners, but like Malcolm, you said, you know, people are maybe hopping with nobles throughout the boil, and then maybe later, you know, in the kettle or even in the dry hop, they're using American hops. I don't see many hoppy Pilsners out there unless they're IPL, but kind of the hoppier, more subtle style Pilsners that are hopped with things like Citra and Mosaic. I think those seem to kind of overtake the beer.
Well, the funny thing is, a lot of the hoppy lagers, if you look at some of the grists, they are the way a lot of IPAs have been going. So a lot of IPAs in the last 10 years, I'll say, 8 maybe, have been stripping away caramel malt, you know, almost entirely. Some leave a little bit, you know, so there's some malty sweetness to prop up the hop. Now, a lot of the hoppy lagers are already there because they're either all or mostly Pilsner malt of some origin. So they might do like 50% pale ale malt, but some of them, and then the rest with a Pils malt, and maybe a touch of like a low crystal, like a crystal 10 or a crystal 8. You know, sometimes they'll use like Carahel, for example.
Yeah.
And some people still use like, you know, Carapils and Carafoam, and that's essentially just a very low crystal. So they're just using those, and it's funny because that's where a lot of IPAs have been going towards, you know, and maybe that's why I like them.
Yeah, I can't help but be reminded of this, the concept of the regression towards the mean. It's almost like all beers are kind of moving towards this one single, you know, the grandfather beer that's just delicious and crisp and dry.
This has been done before in other countries. You know,
yeah,
you know,
we're like, oh yeah, we'll just do what they're doing, what they've been doing.
Hey, it turns out that if I want to drink a lot of a beer, I just want it to be like this, you know.
Yeah, exactly. In terms of yeast, we're looking at something. I think traditional lager yeast works for this, which typically is going to require you to ferment cool, you know, anywhere between say 46 degrees Fahrenheit, which is about 8 degrees Celsius, all the way up to 52 maybe, which is about, you know, 11 degrees Celsius. And that's, you know, that's the idea there, is that you're going to restrain ester development and phenol development so that you just have this nice, clean, crisp, you know, fermentation character in the beer.
Yeah. You can use cheat code yeast, easy mode, you know, 3470. That's awesome yeast for for hoppy pale lagers, and
I think that's got. Somebody was telling me that's like the most popularly used lager yeast in the world.
Yeah, I think it is. I don't have some information in front of me, but I've just heard that, so I'm parroting it, more or less.
Yeah.
But that's what I've heard. And
Yeah.
it makes sense because if you think of the ease of using it, you can buy it in bricks, dried bricks, and then you can either use it dry or you can, propagate it yourself. Rehydrate it and propagate it yourself. So.
All right, well, let's go through some of the traditional approaches to brewing this style. We've already got the ingredients kind of set. How would you approach water chemistry if you're making a kind of this traditional style hoppy Pilsner? I have my ideas based on my approach to making hoppier style ales in terms of water chem. Is that kind of the approach you would take as well?
Well, water, like ingredients, they're control levers, right? They're inputs. They're the dials or knobs are levers, whatever analogy you want to use, that the brewer has to steer the beer. So I started my first few of these hoppy lagers with a yellow balance profile, which you can find in Brewing Water, from Martin Brewingard, and that worked well. And then I decided, hey, I want to accent the hops a little bit more, and then I made it more like a Pilsner water. So I went more towards yellow and bitter, and I had a little bit more sulfate.
That's kind of my take as well. Higher sulfate, and for me, what I get from that, or what I think I get from increasing the sulfate, one is that crispness. I want a very, very quick to wash off my palate, beer when I'm making a hoppy Pilsner. And that higher sulfate seems to do that. It adds that crispness, a kind of a sharpness to the hop character as well as to the bitterness. But if you use high amounts of it, I also get what I always call just kind of that lager character, which I wonder if that has anything to do with just the perception of maybe a little bit of sulfur in the beer.
I wonder, because really, if you go, very high on sulfate, as we've talked about, or is talked about by many, it gets very drying and almost chalky.
Oh yeah,
and that's more ale-like character. So with anything, it's a balance, right? So I have done a Helles profile, which is, yellow balance, but slightly leaning towards chloride. And then I've done the German Pils profile, which is more or less yellow balanced, meaning, sulfate to chloride ratio, but just a little heavier on sulfate. And then I've done a hoppy pale water profile, which is like, more than 2-to-1 sulfate to chloride. And that was too far. I thought it was too much. So my preference, and it's not the right answer, it's my answer, what I like on my palate is about 1.2 to 1.5 max sulfate to chloride ratio.
Yeah, and so for water chemistry on these styles of beer, I think it's safe to say use whatever you like to use for German Pilsners, which tends to be, you can use whatever water you want, but I think that's Malcolm and I are doing. Typically for the mash, we're looking at a 60 to 90 minute mash rest. The 90-minute mash rest is going to encourage more conversion and ostensibly better attenuation, and so you can get again ostensibly kind of a drier beer, which is good for this style. In terms of the boil, again, you're using a high amount of Pilsner malt. So we're going to you got to boil for 90 minutes minimum if you're using Pilsner malt, because that's going to drive off that DMS precursor, SMM, so that you don't get that inappropriately corny, flavor characteristic.
That's the traditional method of doing things to hedge your bets and to make sure that you more or less are making a traditional style lager.
Well, and I think nowhere does tradition come in more than when it comes to fermentation. And, again, we talked about it earlier, we're going to be using a traditional lager yeast, which means we have to chill that wort all the way down to 46, 48 degrees Fahrenheit, or right about 9 degrees Celsius before we pitch our yeast, our traditional, Saccharomyces pastorianus yeast that requires, I put air quotes around that, requires cool fermentation in order to repress any ester or phenol development.
Yeah, so, here you are cold, you've chilled down to standard lager fermentation temperatures, and you have to let it ferment out 2 to 3 weeks, depending on your methods. So now you're at the waiting stage.
The waiting stage, that long fermentation waiting stage with cool fermented lager yeast. It can take up to, in the times that I've brewed beers like this, it'll take me up to like 12 to 13 days at 50 degrees Fahrenheit, 10 degrees Celsius, to start to, get close to my final gravity, my expected final gravity, at which point, some people will raise the temperature in their fermentation chamber to really drive attenuation, make sure to clean up any of the fermentation, off flavor byproducts.
Pitch more yeast.
Or pitch more. Yeah, you can pitch a ton of yeast to help with that as well.
Yeah, I'm done with my low alcohol lagers. Probably about a week and a half, really.
But as opposed to, say, fermenting an ale at 68 degrees done in 3 days or whatever. So it does take a little bit more time. Of course, there are considerations that one might take when it comes to fining or filtering their beer, their Hoppy Pilsner, only because these styles are typically expected to be clear. And so there's you can fine with gelatin. I don't think traditionally anybody's going to do that. You can run it through a filter, which I do. There are some German breweries out there who are filtering their beers and whatnot. But hoppier pilsners do tend to be clear, so that's something that brewers might want to take into consideration. Then, of course, you got to package the beer.
Yeah, so I've took to spunding, so I bring my beers over with about a Play-Doh, maybe slightly more to go extract wise, and bring them over and let them naturally carbonate via residual extract, and I have to goose them up with a pound or two of CO2 to make sure that the lid doesn't leak, but then it's a waiting game again. So once again, we're, I might only take a week and a half to ferment down to that one Play-Doh-ish area, but now I'm waiting in the keg, right, and allowing it to settle and carbonate. So
and spunding is a very traditional method for carbonating, as well as krausening. That's another method that people can use, right?
Right, but just like with krausening and spunding, it's a little bit of a timing, a little bit of a calculation, a little bit of an experience game. So, you're kind of catching these beers on the up or down slope, and it's a lot about experience with certain gravities of beer and different yeast strains. You have to know. You have to know how this carb performs. So you can't just go into it blind. That's one of the nice things about forced carbonating.
Yeah. Well, and so far, you started brewing your beer one day, and I think we're about 6 to 8 weeks out. The final step is letting this beer lager for a while. And
good things come to those who wait, Marshall.
says the lager traditionalist, of course. Well, I'm sure I'm not the only one who avoided making pilsners like this for years, due not only to the fact it would tie up my fermentation chamber for too long, but based on fears that I developed, based on what other people were saying that could go wrong if my process wasn't perfect in making these beers, from DMS and diacetyl to a basically stale, nasty beer. Well, Malcolm took a far from perfect approach to making one of these, which we'll be talking about right after these messages. Shopping for brewing supplies online can be a real hassle, which is why we recommend Love to Brew. They've got great prices, super fast shipping, and they carry exclusive products like East Coast Yeast, the Brewer's Essentials brand, and their award-winning beer recipe kits. They're also the only place you can pick up your very own Brewlosophy recipe kit. The numbers don't lie. Love to Brew has hundreds of 5-star reviews, and thousands of brewers are choosing them for their supplies and ingredients each year. Experience the difference at lovetobrew.com. That's love, the number 2, brew.com. Have you ever thought about adding a port to your kettle but held off because you didn't feel like drilling into your gear or sending it off to have someone else do it? From the makers of the super fast counterflow chiller, the Exchillerator, comes the Hangover, the easiest way to add extra ports to your kettle as well as countless other options. Mount a faucet to your keg for easy portable pouring. Set up the perfect whirlpool arm. Hold a heating element in place. All of this and so much more without permanently modifying your gear. Manufactured right here in the United States, the Hangover offers brewers too many convenient solutions to list here. So head over to Exchillerator.com today to see what the Hangover can do for you.
Compact and simple to use with a small footprint for brewing indoors, the Grainfather makes it easy for you to brew professional quality beers at home. The Grainfather is an all-in-one brewing system that lets you brew all grain beer in a single compact stainless steel unit. It uses an electric heating element and pump to maintain a constant temperature and to circulate the wort during the mashing and cooling stages. It also comes with a counterflow chiller to reduce chilling times and produce high quality wort. And now, with the addition of their conical fermenter, the Grainfather takes things one step further by offering homebrewers state-of-the-art temperature-controlled fermentation just like commercial breweries use. And with the Grainfather Recipe Creator and Connect app, you can easily design a recipe, sync your brewing system with your phone, and then just sit back and relax as the app takes over and assures that you maintain your scheduled mash temps and boil schedule. Head to grainfather.com to purchase your all-in-one brewing system today and to sign up for their free recipe creator tool. Once more, head on over to grainfather.com, that's grainfather.com, and get started today.
Well, it wasn't terribly long after my very first short and shoddy brew day, something we'll likely discuss on a future episode, that I proposed the idea of making just such a beer for a talk that we were giving at HomebrewCon 2016 in Baltimore. Since I live so far away, the natural alternative was to have you brew it, Malcolm, which I recall you accepting with some reservations.
Yeah, I am more or less, I think I am the more traditional brewer of the group.
You are, man.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, well, okay.
Yeah.
But it's just, old habits die hard. And, I believe in some of these processes because I've read them in books. And also, I was making pretty decent beer using these methods. So, I'm just like, I definitely believe you can get away with doing one or two things outside the box and still make a good beer because it's the robustness of the process, right? If you're out of the lines in one area, it's like you're still fine, because you've done everything else right.
Well, and we get a lot of comments from people about the experiments that we do where they're saying, hey, listen, I get you've isolated this single variable so well that it didn't have a noticeable impact. But what happens if you compile them all together? And that question really is what inspired the whole short and shoddy series.
Yeah, it's like, let's do everything wrong, wrong, air quotes there again. So
yeah, exactly. Well, how did you feel? I remember your response when I asked you if you would brew a Hoppy Pilsner for our talk in Baltimore, and you weren't terribly excited about it.
Well, so at the time, especially, I'm a prideful brewer. Like I like brewing, and I like the beer that I present to people. I mean, I've made bad beer. We all screw up, but usually it doesn't get past my doorstep. It's
right.
like, I look at my notes and don't do that again. So here I am with a timeline. Like this beer we've committed to making it. And I think the conversation was like, well, what if it's bad? And you're like, that's fine. That can just show that you can't do all these things wrong. And I'm like, no, I'm
not going to serve crap beer to everybody at a homebrewing conference. Yeah.
Like there's going to be a room full of people and they're going to all be like, this guy, we should burn him.
Suffice to say, you were legit anxious that this was not going to turn out. Tell us about what you ultimately ended up doing and how you brewed this beer.
So I think you just want to do a short and shoddy beer, and I think together we came up with the idea of doing a hoppy lager, because if you're going to stress a beer with shoddy methods and a quick turnaround, what would be the bigger stressor? Would be a lager, right? I mean, running ales is a thing. You can make a running ale in 9 to 14 days, but to do a lager, I think I brewed it like on the 27th or 28th, and we were serving it like the 7th or something like that. I mean, I was putting it in the keg at 11 days, like 12 days. So it was fining in the car ride from Pittsburgh to Baltimore.
So starting from the beginning, what was your water chemistry like? Did you do anything special to your water chem, or did you kind of take a shoddy approach to that as well?
Well, no, my water, I was lucky in Pittsburgh. My water was pretty nice. It was like, 70 ppm sulfate to like 60 chloride. So I basically just diluted it to bring the overall concentration of minerals down, but the ratios were the same. So I think I cut it like 25%. Shoddy, I wouldn't say so, but certainly not super nuanced. I just basically, because I was using almost all Pilsner malt, I just wanted to eliminate some of the hardness. So that was my approach there.
And so no, you didn't take your normal measures to, measure out, minerals and all that and really bring it to the water profile that you find to be desirable in this style.
No, but I know what my water is. So, I mean, I knew if I diluted 25%, I was going to be at 25% of what my water is, So I knew what I was doing, but it was,
It wasn't your norm.
Yeah. I certainly didn't goose up, calcium and sulfate and chloride,
Right. So now let's get into the fun part. So you, how long did you mash this wort for? Did you do, was it a no sparge, or did you do like a batch sparge?
This was a batch sparge.
And so then you mashed for how long?
So I only mashed for 20 minutes, which I thought was aggressive because at the time, a lot of the articles were saying, well, all the conversion's done after 30 minutes.
Right.
So I thought, well, let's do 20 then, and 15 almost makes for a too hectic of a brew day. I mean, you're really just, you almost don't have time to transfer stuff,
Right,
So
right.
I ended up with 20, and I was a bit concerned because the wort did look a little more turbid than I was used to. So I was thinking like, oh, where's this going?
And then you put that wort in a boil kettle, and this is I just think this is so fun to talk about. And as soon as it hits the boil kettle, you do your batch sparge, you get your full volume of wort, and you bring it to a boil. And typically, we're boiling for 90 minutes. That's not exactly what you did, though.
No, so I was also like, I'm thinking like, do I cheat here? Do I not turn the heat all the way up so I can still keep converting? But in the spirit of the brew, I'm just like, grip it and rip it. So I put the burner to it, and I batch sparged, and then I boiled for 20 minutes.
20-minute boil, which required, this is one of the things about this method that's a little bit, you really got to consider, it required a fairly large hop addition at that 20-minute mark. Some people will do first wort hop there as well. I think you used almost like 2 ounces of a 8.4% alpha sterling hop.
Yeah, so 2 ounces of sterling at 8.4%. So it was a massive hops, compared to typical lager,
Yeah. So 20-minute boil. As soon as you're done boiling, you chilled the wort. Did you do anything short or shoddy for the chilling process, or did you just kind of use your normal process there?
Yeah. Well, I used the jaded, so that usually cools. In Pittsburgh, we had fairly cold groundwater, so I was cold in like 15 minutes. I don't remember the time. It was like between 15 and 20 minutes. So
yeah. So it's the crazy thing to consider at this point, right? Is that from the start of your brew day, from heating up or collecting your water, heating it up, whatever, and to chilling your wort, you're about an hour and a half in, right?
And it's hectic, man. I mean, you have to have everything staged. You're going. It's almost like. Who was the extra? I'm talking to a bunch of kids who are listening, probably like they're in their 20s, 25-ish. Richard Simmons, is that his name? Like the exercise guy? Yeah. I mean, I may or may not have been wearing a unitard, but you're like going around doing like grabbing this and grabbing that, and you're just like,
it is nonstop.
Yeah.
It's fun though. I think there's a fun part to it. So you chilled the wort using normal process, which we'll call it short because the chilling didn't take very long at all. And then of course you racked the wort to a couple of conical fermenters, and you had to pitch some yeast.
Well, let me say too, like I had just gotten those conicals, so I was a little bit nervous about that too, because I'm thinking like, I didn't exactly have that process down. So
right.
Here I am transferring to these conicals. I'm somewhat in awe because I'm like, these are beautiful, So I'm transferring the wort in there, and once again, it is fairly turbid because there's a lot of hop matter in there. So compared to usually when I do a lager, I like to varloff, and clarify the wort, and I'll get a lot of that hop out from doing a very aggressive whirlpool, So I'm basically bringing over this dark yellow green tinged baby vomit into these conicals. I'm just thinking like, this does not look delicious. So
right.
what's going to happen here?
Well, and something we missed. This is a hoppier lager, and so you did a pretty hefty dose of Azacca, which isn't a traditional noble hop by any means, but a pretty hefty dose of Azacca, and a lot of that got transferred over to your fermenter.
Yeah, exactly. And so we did 2 ounces for the boil, and then I added another, I think, a half ounce or an ounce. It's like a half ounce per batch, so because I think it was a double batch.
Yeah.
So I added a full ounce to 11 gallons of this Azacca hop, and now immediately my wort smells like citrus fruit and pears. So I'm thinking like, what is this monstrosity?
It's so good.
But and then I don't chill it all the way down, because typically when you do a lager, I'm chilling down to the 40s.
Mm-hmm.
But instead, I'm just like, screw it. I think I chilled to like 70 something. 75?
I think you're at 72 degrees. Yeah, 72 degrees.
Yeah.
Which is, I mean, that's just 72 degrees is 22 degrees Celsius for our international listeners out there.
Yeah, and at the time, I didn't have a good, secondary cooling method, so I didn't have like a glycol system or anything. So I was just using cornies full of ice water in my chest freezer as my cooling medium. And by the way, it doesn't work very well. But I'm thinking like...
Well, it didn't need to work very well for
this
one.
Well, no, but I'm thinking like, okay, So we talked, and I was like, I'm going to ferment these at ale temperature. So that to me means 67, 65 Fahrenheit, I'm just like 72. Screw it.
Shoddy for the win, man.
Yeah, man. I wanted to get it down because once again, I'm serving this. So I was like, what do I do? Do I hedge my bets and at least ferment it at a decent ale temperature? Or do I just go really crap, and just go 72 degrees Fahrenheit? That's what I did.
And that's what we did. And to be clear, you fermented this with the WLP 833, a traditional lager strain, at 72 degrees. So what quite a bit higher than what that yeast is supposed to be fermented at.
And that was another area where I thought about hedging my bets. I was like, well, if I use 3470 or Cal Lager, if I use Cal Lager or San Fran Lager or 3470. At least we know those ferment decently at warmer temperatures, so.
You have to imagine how much I was enjoying the process of watching you writhe with all of this. And so then this was interesting. So after 6 days, you reached your final gravity. And the beer, I remember you telling me the beer still smelled salt, had a strong sulfur.
It smelled like eggs. It smelled like eggs, and it was like a brunch. It smelled like eggs and fruit.
Oh my God!
So only thing that was missing was mimosas and old ladies in fascinator hats. So yeah, citrus and like melon and pears and eggs.
Okay, and so then you cold crashed the beer for a day. We had to get this thing ready. We were kind of coming up on had to have this thing ready in time for HomebrewCon. You cold crash for a day. Find them with gelatin, which is kind of a modern technique. I know that it's been around for a while, but for lager brewing, it kind of I love what Ray calls it, powdered thyme. Yep. So it kind of that we were hoping fingers crossed that would supplant the need to really lager these beers to get clear. And I love there's a photo that you took, and it's in the article of the beer at 6 days post pitch, and then 3 days after, and you find it that day, and then 3 days after you find it, and it is just the difference couldn't be more drastic.
Yeah, I was pretty nervous putting it into kegs because I thought because it was still almost had like a greenish tinge to it,
Right.
And it was definitely darker than I thought it was going to be I think it was all pills and a little bit of Cara 8.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking like I'm going to serve a New England IPA lager to a bunch of people and go, yeah, short and shoddy, give it a whirl.
Oh my goodness. Well, for packaging, of course, you kegged them up like you normally do. I don't think did you purge the kegs with CO2 before you packaged?
I'll have to admit there I did not, because I was kind of hoping that by not doing so, the oxygen would consume some of that sulfur.
Well, hey, and I'll tell you what, I mean, all the shoddier, right?
Yeah.
Well, this being one of the earlier short and shoddy batches that we brewed, we didn't collect data the way that we do now. And we are, if we make this a series, we're going to be getting into that really fun data in the future. However, this one was pretty cool because we did serve it at our talk at HomebrewCon 2016 in Baltimore. And we asked for feedback afterwards. We'll talk about the presentation. But before we get to that, I want to remind everyone about our rad sponsor, Brewers Hardware, who specialize in tri-clover compatible sanitary fittings, conical fermenters, kettles, and brew stands. Brewers Hardware offers a variety of unique items for home and craft brewers, including high-quality stainless fittings at fantastic prices with super fast shipping. Anyone looking to go electric needs to check out the new BCS 482 control system, which provides everything needed for total brewery automation. Learn more at brewershardware.com, and don't forget to mention Brewlosophy at checkout to receive a free gift. That's brewershardware.com. So so basically what happened is I show up to HomebrewCon 2016. Malcolm, you were driving down from Pittsburgh, I believe.
That's right.
And we had been communicating the whole time. You said, I've got these 2 kegs of what's ultimately going to be a terrifying experience for you sitting in the back of your car. And you let me know when you were there. You said, hey, come on, meet me out at my car real quick. I'll give you a sample of these. You can, if we want to see if we really want to serve these. And I come out to your car and you pour me my initial sample of it, and you had been telling me the entire time about the sulfur aroma that you were picking up and how you were concerned that maybe it wasn't going to be, this perfectly clear beer.
Here's the goofy thing, man. Is like, so just like the day before, I had sampled them, and I still thought it was too hoppy in the mouthfeel and too sulfury. So Yeah, I was concerned. I didn't necessarily want to serve them unless we were serving them as an example of too many things go wrong, and I know that's an acceptable example because now I would be more willing to do that, basically go, yeah, I tried all these things wrong and it was bad, c'est la vie. But, Brewlosophy was just on its upswing then, and I've only been a member for like a year, so I kind of wanted. I would have rather have started on the good foot, I want to serve a good beer,
So, and I know that you have that, and there's a Schadenfreude element to me and watching you brew this because I knew you were just hating it so much. But you served me this sample out in the parking lot. It was my very first taste of it, and I know that there's this psychological component for you of watching somebody enjoy your beer, and that's going to impact even the way we perceive what we brewed, right?
Sure.
But my response was really positive, and as biased as I was or whatever, I really did enjoy it. I thought it tasted exactly like a Hoppy Pilsner. It was very good, and I was excited. You and I ended up talking about it a whole bunch as we went and turned the kegs in. But I was excited for our presentation because we had a pretty unique way for teaching, or I guess informing the audience of the way that this beer was brewed.
Well, I also, it was funny because I think this is one of the first beers you might have had from me. I think we had some beers out in San Diego, but with all these, tortured methods that we were doing, here you were drinking this in the back of my car in the parking lot, so I had to like hook up a tap or whatever. I would encourage the listeners to go watch the movie Bottle Shock. It's about the competition between the U.S. and French vintners. And there was a moment in which, he had hated the wine, and I don't want to give away the whole story, but basically at one point someone's drinking the wine and it's good, and the other guy, the character in the movie is going like, it's good. And that's what it was like, because you're pouring it, and as I was pouring it into your glass, it was pouring clear. I'm like,
super clear.
I'm like, what happened? Why is that crystal clear? And we know what happened. It finally settled out.
Yeah.
But the carbonation came in line. It was crystal clear, and when you poured it, instead of sulfur, I got, fruity hops. And I was just like, and you're drinking it, and you're like, it's good. And I'm like, give me that. You liar.
And it was more than just. I mean, I think what I told you was, I know you're expecting me to say that this is good, whatever.
Yeah.
But I'm being dead serious. This is better than some commercial hoppy lagers that I've had. Yeah. There's nothing wrong with it. And to my palate, it didn't have any of the DMS that you'd expect from a short boil. It didn't have any, it wasn't poorly attenuated from the short and mash. It was just a good, solid example. There was no esters that I could detect. The fruitiness that I got was what I always get from Azacca hops. I mean, everything about it was completely in line with what I would expect, which made presenting it to our audience all the more fun. And we didn't let anyone know what we were doing. So we did a talk about modern techniques, like modern approaches to brewing beer, which really just focused on a lot of the experimental stuff that we've been doing. And during our talk, we served this beer. We had folks serving beer to all the people in the audience, and they're just sipping on a beer. We told them ahead of time, we didn't, too difficult for us to collect data on an experiment. And so, we're going to let you guys just sip on this beer that Malcolm brewed, whatever. We didn't tell them what it was or anything. And we get to the end of the talk, and our final slide had like a description of how the beer was made.
Yeah, it was, because you presented it as if we don't have time to do an experiment, so just drink this while we're talking.
Right.
And then at the end, it was like, I think you had it on like a timer. It was like, oh, and the beer you're drinking is this. And it was fermented with 833, and it was a 15-minute or 20-minute mash, and it was a 20-minute boil, and it was fermented at like 72 Fahrenheit. And that to me was the killer. It was 833 at 72 Fahrenheit.
Yeah.
And then people, they had been given the beer about halfway through the talk, the presentation, and then everyone started going, I want more of that.
Oh, dude, the shock was palpable. It was hilarious.
But we went through 2 kegs of it. So that's pretty cool.
Oh, they finished it. By the end of the talk, they finished 10 gallons of that beer. And this was like an early morning. It was a 9 a.m. talk, I think.
Yeah.
They put us in that wonderful slot. But I mean, I remember, you're right, that final slide came up on a timer, and you and I are looking out of the audience, taking questions and answering questions. And you start to see people picking up their glass and looking at it and smelling at it more. smelling their beer more and then walking to the back to get more of it. And then that's where the questions started coming in about the beer. We kind of fooled them a little bit. We are the jerks of homebrewing, I suppose, but we had fun doing it.
Well, it was funny because I think at first they were just enjoying it as a whatever. Like, so I don't think we presented it as anything. We didn't say it was an ale. We didn't say it was so we just gave them a beer. So then you're just drinking it as presented. And then as soon as we told them how it was brewed, I can't say this, I can't read the minds and say this is how everyone was thinking, but I would imagine a lot of people were going, well, what did I miss that was wrong with that?
They all went back looking for more.
That's exactly what I would do. I would go, well, let me go smell for the DMS, the sulfur.
Exactly.
Whatever.
Well, there was, when we got off the stage and we were walking out into the lobby, there was probably a group 6-7 people who were out there just, could not ask enough questions about this beer. Couldn't believe that it was made the way it was. People at a homebrew conference, you'd expect to know maybe a little bit more about some of the finer details of off flavors and whatnot. And everyone out there was saying, man, I cannot believe this was boiled. That was the big hang up, right? This was boiled for 20 minutes and fermented with a lager yeast at 72 degrees Fahrenheit. That's nuts. I mean, to this day, I make a lot of these short and shoddy beers. And to this day, I am regularly surprised that these things don't cause crazy problems.
Yeah. And I still remember thinking, I wonder if this is going to come out. And through whatever, scientific miracles, it clarified in the keg during the ride over.
Oh man,
I was when you were drinking and he said it was good. I was in disbelief. I was like, why would you say that to me?
You're lying to me. Yeah,
you're a liar. So
don't let your love get in the way of truth.
Yeah. And was it like a phenomenal beer? I don't remember all the details of it. I just remember it being pretty good.
Yeah, I loved it. Yeah,
I remember one of the criticisms was like, well, why would you use such a bold hop like a Azacca if you're trying to prove something? And of course,
right.
My teasing responses. Well, what makes you think I'm trying to prove something? I'm presenting something, not proving something. But I wanted to make a hoppy lager, and I had received some Azacca hops for free, so that's what I used.
Boom. Yeah.
I think it would be neat to try it again. Maybe with Tetnang or even Saphir, because I liked that hop so much because of Pivo, of course, but. As it was, if someone were to give me that beer while playing, some yard game, I thought it was a decent beer, and I was as surprised as anyone else. And if someone in the audience didn't like it, cool. I understand, maybe there was a fault or two here that I was no longer picking up on because I was so happy that it wasn't horrible.
Well, Malcolm, I certainly appreciate you sacrificing, the way you did to brew those beers for our talk. And as our first episode in this short and shoddy series, I think we're going to have a lot of fun talking about these. We are very interested in your feedback and would love to know whether you enjoyed this show, what you think we can do better about it. As with anything, there are going to be hiccups, anything new, but you can drop any of that stuff on our social media. We're on all of the platforms. You can send us a note to feedback@brewlosophy.com, or you can leave us a voice message at 951-444-0320. We're going to determine what direction to take this based on what we hear back from listeners. And in fact, we've also been tossing around the idea of starting up a hop focus series where we refer to data from the Hop Chronicles project that we've got going. So again, if that sounds cool, let us know. All right, coming up next week is our 5th Brew & A episode 50. I can't believe that, which contributor Brian Hall is going to be joining me on. To read more about the stuff we discussed in this episode, as well as all of the other experimental projects we're doing, you can head over to brewlosophy.com. The Brewlosophy podcast is made possible by the generous support of our sponsors, as well as all of our rad listeners. We seriously could not do this without you. Cheers to everyone who has subscribed and left a review of our show. It makes a huge difference. If you haven't yet, please consider doing so. Head over to brewlosophy.com/support to view a list of ways you can easily help us to continue producing this podcast. If you want a reward for your support, visit patreon.com/brewlosophy. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Brewlosophy podcast. Until then, think beer.
Start off the morning with some hot tea, lemon and honey, cause it soothes my throat. Put some herb in the bowl, yeah, it's homegrown. Ain't gotta go through the middleman. No